My guest today is my good friend Bob McKinnon, who founded the organization Moving Up USA. His work focuses on the exploration of social mobility and asks us to consider an important question on the road to success: who helped us along the way?
And so people were really pretty uptight about.
So we met, I think I met you, it might have been 10 plus years now. And I met you a couple of times, but the last time I remember was we were at a fundraiser at Facebook through our mutual friend
Oh,
Will.
that's right. Yeah.
And I don't know at that point was Moving Up in its beginning forms, or it had been around for a little bit at that point.
Yeah. So essentially, I have always wanted to try to find a home for the work that I did outside of like working with other organizations
Right.
and stuff.
Okay.
And so we started a small nonprofit called the Moving Up Media Lab, and we would do like a different project every year, and that was great. And we still do some things through that.
Okay.
But to do more robust work, it was like, how do we find a real home?
Yeah,
And so partnering with an academic institution like City College,
Got it.
where that's what they do. They're an engine of social mobility. They're still like, while a lot of people are questioning what is higher education for, like they're still like, right locked in on sort of
Got
like
it.
the primary purpose of, creating access to education so people can have a better life.
So is it right that when we had first met at that point, this thing was sort of blossoming and taking off? And
Yeah.
So one of the things I want to say why I was so excited to talk to you
Yeah.
today, because it had been so long, this project has bloomed into so many things. And
Yeah.
one of the things that first struck me about the project was, and you'll obviously say in your own words, but the first thing that struck me was the idea of all those who have helped us along the way.
Yep.
This beautiful idea.
Yeah.
And your story, which I want to hear about. I think what's so interesting is there's such a true through line
Yeah.
in your life story, now how you express it and make it useful for others.
Yeah.
I found inspiring for many years ago.
Right.
And it's great to sort of now make the loop and come back and just get to hear about it more and talk about it. So take us a little bit back to the origins
Yeah.
of what I think your main, I don't mean to put words in your mouth, but tell me if it's true, the main arc is this idea of social mobility,
Yeah.
challenging the notion, not rejecting it,
Yep.
but I think adding color to the notion that I just did it on my own.
Yeah.
And I don't think from a way of taking away from that, but I hear it as a way of like bringing gratitude into your life
Yeah.
and seeing all the other pieces that fit. So maybe talk about that and also where that got started, like how you even sort of became in
Yes.
tune with that in your own life.
Yeah, so I mean, like, in my own life, like I grew up in a situation where I was a single mom who was a bartender in a, poor area in Boston, raising 3 kids on her own, right? And flash forward, I'm the only one in my family went to college. I moved to New York. I have a successful career. I'm making good money, and I'm like, this is the life. This is, the
Right,
American
right.
dream, right? Literally, I've, gone from the bottom up towards the top, and I'm like, this is the American dream. And yet I still had a lot of feelings of guilt and like, why did I make it? And other people I knew are struggling with, their own lives. I still didn't understand exactly how it worked because, yeah, I worked really hard, but I've seen my mom in a bar work hard.
Yeah.
My brother works at Harley Davidson on the line. He works hard. My sister, has had a lot of different jobs. So it wasn't like working hard was the only
The
thing,
only
right?
factor, yeah.
And so I knew that wasn't right. And still I needed to make sense of it, right? And so I went on this journey that has been, pretty varied and wild. But the through line is trying to, help others move up in life like others once helped me, and because I slowly began to realize through understanding what contributes to social mobility and how we think about it, like it is a really incredible story. Not anyone's journey, right? It's just really so many things, big and small, can contribute to where you end up in life. And you're right, it's not to sort of take away from our own agency.
Yeah.
In fact, that's part of the problem in terms of how we've talked about this. But it is to acknowledge there's so much more. And when you have that richer appreciation of attribution, then yeah, you're more grateful, you're more compassionate, you're more understanding, you're more likely to help others, and it's just a different way of seeing the world.
How, and there's so much to dive into, but just what comes to mind now, as you take on all these different projects and how does that practically impact how you work? Let's say even your emotional approach towards the work. Does it relieve pressure? Does it inspire? Does it put things in perspective? How you found that beneficial?
Yeah, when you're able to take a beat and sort of recognize like what's important about the work, yeah, it's just it really ratchets, takes the pressure off. Like an example, like
Yeah.
yesterday was the publication date for my latest children's book, right?
This is Dreamers.
No, that's America Gives Thanks.
America. Oh, okay.
Yeah,
So
America
you
Gives
have a
Thanks.
third one
Yeah,
coming
yeah,
out.
it just came out.
Oh,
Yeah, yeah,
wow,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
congrats.
Yeah,
Okay,
thank you.
great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, and the first thing I did in the morning was I thanked people. I thanked my editor, my publicist, my agent, my family, and it was like, yeah, that's what it's about.
Yeah, yeah. Have you heard of Marsilio Ficino?
Mm-mm.
So Marsilio Ficino was said to be the founder of the Florentine Renaissance. He was a philosopher. He helped translate Plato. He was a what do you call it? Sponsored by the de Medici family. I forget
Yep.
what that's called. But and he has a beautiful book of letters which are translated. And one of them is simply this, just listing
Yeah,
all the teachers. And it's such a beautiful letter. You don't know these people.
yeah,
But to my father, I owe this. To my mother, I owe this.
Yeah.
And it's heartwarming, and it doesn't make you feel. There's something about it that doesn't make you feel isolated. It somehow
makes you feel larger.
Larger.
Yeah, and
Exactly.
there's actually there's a tenet in the science around awe,
Yeah.
which is one of the reasons why awe and wonder works the way it does, is it actually makes us feel smaller. And you may think feeling small is bad, right? But actually it's like, oh, look at where I am in the scheme of everything else. And in fact, it just enlarges us,
Yeah. Plato says all philosophy begins in wonder.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
and even the walk, we all know that New York City moment when you've walked down the street 1,000 times.
Yep.
You look up in one of the rare moments, and you're just blown away by
Yeah.
the city you're in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny. So there's a lot of tension in terms of how we think about our journey and why some people succeed and some don't, and it's can get really sort of weighed down by politics and things along those lines. And part of that, as an example, what we're just talking about is like, how do we comport history, right? And so, we're both white guys, right? And so we have certain advantages with that, but we also have other things that make us who we are and lived experiences that may have been disadvantages. And so how do you have conversations like that? And years ago, I was interviewing Natasha Trethewey, who was a former U.S. Poet Laureate.
Okay.
And she had written a book called Memorial Drive, and that's the name of the road that goes by Stone Mountain in Atlanta. So this monument to, the rebel cause, and she's an African American woman, and so her book is about trying to reconcile her own personal history. And I was talking to her, and I had just had an interesting experience where I was about to deliver a commencement address at my alma mater. And I was talking to the librarian there, or the historian, and I was going to mention land-grant universities, which Penn State is.
Okay.
And I look historically at land grants like, man, if these things didn't happen, if the Morrill Act didn't put this in place, signed by Lincoln, then I couldn't afford to go to college, because it was designed to make college more affordable. So a lot of the state schools are land-grant universities.
Meaning they didn't have to purchase the land, so is that what it is?
Well,
or?
so it's a good point, because most people go to a land-grant university and they're like, I think I know what it is, and
Yeah,
what
I
I
don't
think,
know what it
yeah.
is, yeah.
And so what I thought it was that so in Pennsylvania they must have been given some land to put Penn State.
Yeah.
And this historian told me, like, well, that's not really what it is. And what it was instead was that land was taken from Native Americans in Arizona, New Mexico,
Okay.
and it was given to these states to then sort of sell to create the endowments necessary for the growth of these universities. And I was like, man,
That's a different story.
So the story I was telling myself about like land grants being this awesome thing for me, now was changed. And when I was talking to Trethewey about the story and how did we reconcile these things, like, should I feel awful?
Yeah.
And her response was, isn't it wonderful that you know that?
Right.
Like, she used the word wonder, which is because it gave me a larger appreciation of my connection to history, good and bad, that now it's just more nuanced and understanding. And so I think that as we go down our individual journeys, we can go and tell ourselves this one story that, like, I worked really hard and I made it, and there's psychological reasons why we tell that story that way. Or we can constantly be looking for sort of ways to deepen our appreciation for that. And I think that ultimately leads to a more satisfying and better life.
So this is something I want to explore with you. So we'll jump into it, and then I definitely want to, but you got to follow the thread, as it were. So when I looked at yourself and heard you talk on this topic, what came up was the word privilege, right?
Yeah.
That falls in there somewhere.
Yeah.
And so I guess the really question is, what is the useful way to look at privilege? I certainly see, I understand the conversation.
Yeah.
I feel like it gets weaponized.
Yep.
And so I think you hinted at something with this wonder approach that so how do you think about that term, and how do you find it useful? How can we use it?
Yeah. Generally, I don't think it's useful.
Okay.
I think we can look at sort of like there's ways to. I prefer terminology that looks at headwinds and tailwinds.
Yeah.
That you had some tailwinds that are pushing you forward, often that you don't know about, and headwinds that are in your way. That's terminology that was from research by Thomas Gilovich and Shai Davide, which I thought was really useful. Because if you think about, like, if you're on a run, you're more aware of the things that are in your face, the wind,
right,
and less aware of the tailwinds.
Point,
And so, you're right. Things like privilege has been weaponized, and so I don't find it particularly useful in having conversations, because if you're a certain part of the political spectrum, you basically just sort of it's chafing, right?
Right.
Which isn't to say it's not true. We all have privileges, right? But
Which
I
is
just think
sort of what you're bringing it up, but you don't frame it that way.
I don't like to. Well, I'll give you an example, like, just to show you, like, how, like, years ago I created with support from the Ford Foundation. Something called Your American Dream Score, which was a quiz that you could take.
I took 10 years ago. I don't remember my score.
Yeah. Like a million. It's crazy. Like 1 million people have taken the quiz, which is really wild, right?
Cool.
And so it asks you questions about your life that just reflect on where you came from, and, like, your own work ethic and things that helped you. And it's the score that you get at the end is less important than the exercise of reflection.
Right.
But when we did it, we were fortunate that it got some attention in the press, and there was one outlet that was progressive, and they were doing a story, and they asked the question you asked about, like, what about, isn't this a question of privilege?
Yeah.
And in fact, they said, isn't this a privilege calculator? And I said, no, it is decidedly not, because this isn't strictly about privilege. It's also asking you about things that, were not sort of going in your favor. And if we called it that, we would immediately turn off half the country.
Yeah.
The article comes out, and what is the headline?
Privilege calculator.
Yeah. It's like how to test your privilege.
Of course.
And I called up the reporter. I'm like, I don't understand this. I told you that this was not. What? And she's like, I don't control the headline, and we thought this would get more clicks. And so again, sometimes we don't want to have a good conversation. We just want to weaponize language. But look, it's important to acknowledge those things that we have working for us, whether it's historically or things that we've manufactured on our own, and also acknowledge the disadvantages. It gets really complicated. We get into questions around sort of deservedness and what is fair, and this question of attribution, which I think is a healthy way to look at it. I mean, like, what do we attribute where we are to? And there's a whole host of factors. And it's not one thing. And you're never going to get a score, for example, or a number that says, oh, this is how much of where I am is because of my personal effort, and this is how much of whatever. It's like, it's sort of a fool's errand to do that. But to have the conversation and reflect on the things, I think, is always a useful exercise.
And I think that's what I find that the hardest part, because I think people want to action everything.
Yeah.
Right? And what you're talking about, and my experience in studying philosophy and meditation, and the way I try to look at life is there is a reflection aspect of it where I can't action that.
Yeah.
But there's a growing awareness.
Yeah.
And at some point there's a level of understanding, and I think what I love about your work is if you get to that place where gratitude has a greater part in your life. I can't tell you necessarily ABC, but I know there's greater understanding, greater compassion, something happens.
Yeah.
And that's tough, though, to have a public dialogue like that.
Well, and let's be clear. You want people to believe that their effort matters.
Right.
You want people to work hard at many aspects of their life, right? You want people to have agency. And so, yeah, we should still hold that up,
Right, right.
At the same time, it's not, you know, like I like to say, like hard work makes success possible, but not probable,
Right, right.
and
Yeah,
there's a distinction there.
yeah. Our motto at the cafe, our motto of Laughing Man is "All be happy,"
Yeah.
which comes from an ancient Sanskrit prayer, which says, "May all be happy, may all be free of disease, may all have well-being, and none
Hmm.
suffer misery of any kind." And
Yeah.
this is a prayer the wise say in the
Yeah.
morning. And many people say, "Well, that's just ridiculous; it'll never happen." But that's not the point.
Right.
The point is, do you carry that sound in your heart, or
Yeah.
do you carry a sound where only me happy?
Right.
And that's
Yeah. Yeah.
so it's the same sort of thing.
Yeah.
It's just again, what do you
Yeah.
what
Yeah.
do
And
you
I
carry in the heart?
and I would extend that to say only me and people like me
Fair
be
enough. Yeah,
happy,
yeah,
or
right.
me and my family, or
Yeah,
I mean, because you get into some really interesting and difficult discussions around, um, you know, how we think about our lives and resources in the context of others,
yeah,
and
yeah.
how there's something called just world fallacy, right? Which is we need to believe in a just world because the alternative is awful.
Right,
That the world is not fair
right.
and it's sort of chaotic, right? And so sometimes in order to square and make the world feel just, we start saying that some people are more deserving of things than others, or we justify like why someone has a bad outcome because it's their actions or something they didn't do or
Right.
whatever, right? And so we're trying to constantly make the world make sense to us, and that is complicated and difficult work.
Yeah, yeah. Also, um, it depends on what I guess there's a definition of justice,
Yeah.
right? And I mean, you could look around. You take the 2008 crash, right?
Yeah.
There's a reason,
Yeah.
right? There's reasons that lead to that. It's not random, right?
Yeah.
Those can be difficult for people to look at, both on the banking side and the consumer side,
Yeah.
right? So that's fair enough.
Well, you see it right now
Yeah.
with what's happening with immigration.
Yeah, yeah.
Like some people may, on a blanket level, say like, well, yeah, people should be deported if they're not here legally.
Right, right.
And then they're like, wait, the guy I know at my favorite restaurant is gone,
Yeah.
and he's a good guy, and he's contributed to society, and
Yeah.
he's done the things, and maybe he was on a path to citizenship, and so now you're like, wait, maybe it's not right.
How do we reconcile?
And
Yeah.
so how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, those are the questions. So getting back to some of so the move on, moveup.org.
Yep.
That's the umbrella. That's your main. That's what you work on. That's your main
Yes.
umbrella of work.
So movingupusa.com.
Moving up US sorry about that.
It's okay. Is like that is the umbrella for everything,
Yeah.
and what that includes, that is everything from my writing for adults
Yeah.
to my children's books to my teaching
Yeah.
to the consulting I do that's all cause related, and the small nonprofit organization. So it's all there because the work I do is trying to help people move up.
Yeah.
And so a piece of it's nonprofit, a piece of it is consulting, some of it's writing, but there is this sort of through line of different projects that are designed to help people on their journey.
That's that question. And just going back to when you were sort of, I guess, moving out of the house and getting into college, at what point did this feeling start? I know you mentioned it, but I wasn't clear at what point did the idea of, oh, you know what, I don't understand why I'm here and my siblings are here, right? That it's not
Yeah.
just hard work. At what point, what age would you say that feeling started to come about?
Well, I would probably say, like, in earnest, the feeling started to happen when I was in probably, late 20s.
Oh, okay, yeah.
Because you come to New York, it's so exciting, you're having
Right.
a ton of fun.
And you moved from Boston at that point, or Boston area?
No, I grew up in Boston, right?
Okay.
But my mom moved us to rural Pennsylvania.
Oh,
So
okay.
so I experienced poverty both in the urban setting and in the rural setting, right?
Yeah.
And my family is still all in rural Pennsylvania today. And so I was sort of here, I was living the life. I was doing the kinds of things. I mean, it's not uncommon for like one person to sort of, there's a phrase like one gets out.
Yeah, right.
Like sometimes
right.
there's like, and even in
Did you
that,
have that feeling of like,
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
Okay,
yeah, yeah.
okay.
I definitely wanted to get out. And
Yeah.
in fairness, like, I think some other members of my family, they like where they are and they
Right.
didn't want to, they didn't have the urge, right? So, there's probably some psychology there as well. But there is this idea that sometimes there is an overinvestment in one child
Okay.
in different kinds of ways. Not sometimes intentionally, sometimes not. And so even in my own life, like, and I think back of it, I'm like, man, this must have sucked for my siblings. Like, I wore glasses
Yeah.
and I read, but I wasn't reading Tolstoy as like an 11-year-old, right?
Right.
I was just reading like Red Sox box scores.
Okay.
But my mother called me her little professor.
Oh, okay.
Now I am one, right? So that's weird. But
Interesting. Right.
but
Right.
but but she didn't know a professor. She didn't know anyone who went to college. It was just like that's what she said.
Wearing glasses and you read and
Yeah. And then I
yeah.
was called the smart one,
Okay.
right? And my brother and sister are both really smart and certainly smarter than I am in a lot of different ways.
Right.
But I was called that. So the expectation was, and so even like, there's a term flashbulb memory. Sometimes
Yeah.
we have something that happens in our lives and it has sort of oversized influence
Yeah.
on who we think we are and where we're going. And so that idea set this expectation. Oh, I must be smart and I must be, college bound.
Right.
And so
Was that something you had registered, or it was like slow boiling a lobster? You sort of just
yeah, I think it was slow.
Yeah,
It's like
right.
I guess this is who I am, and like you did feel different, and I even had a different last name than my siblings
Okay.
because of different fathers and stuff. So it was like, yeah, there was a whole. That's what I'm saying. It gets like it is really complicated
Right.
and difficult to unpack.
Yeah.
So when I went out, I thought like a lot of people who like leave home do, and I've had conversations with people who have had similar journeys than I have. You think like, all right, the deal is to sort of like give back and sort of you drop in at Christmas, you have nice gifts, you take people on trips, you do that kind of stuff.
Got it.
And I was doing that, right?
Okay.
And it was
You had
appreciated. It was
left
great.
and you were coming back because you had sort of made it a little bit.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And
Okay.
so like, yeah, so yeah, and so like, even like I always say the first book I ever wrote was my autobiography, which was a
Okay.
5th grade writing
Oh
project,
wow. Okay.
which I did not discover until I was in my late 20s. And I found it in a box of like stuff that my mom kept. And there was a paragraph, or sorry, one of the chapters was my life's ambition.
Huh.
And it said, my life's ambition was to work and work and work so I can make enough money to take my mom to Disney World
Oh,
because
okay.
she's always wanted to go.
It's a pretty nice chapter.
Yeah, yeah, and that's what I did, and
Right,
I took
right.
her and our whole family, which was really wonderful. And so, but I think that's what you sometimes think is the normal path,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And so you don't have to question the journey that you're on versus theirs because you're like, well, I'm still doing things for other people, right? And I think there was a point where I saw that increasingly there were people I knew not just in my family but others, and I'm like, this is really different.
Yeah.
Where I was in Pennsylvania, that place went through some really hard times, and I was like, and so I was feeling guiltier that I was able to do things, and even though I would try to give back, it was sort of insufficient for
Right.
helping someone's trajectory in their life.
Right.
And I just wanted to understand it, and so I got my master's at media studies in the new school because I wanted to figure out how to make things and
How
tell
did
stories.
you even get into? Not how'd you get in, but could you afford college or what? I mean, because that's a big
Well,
leap, right?
yeah. So it's interesting. So it's almost sort of comical
Yeah.
to think about it. I was talking to my daughter, we're in the college search for her now. I applied to one school,
Oh, really?
and I'm like,
Okay.
wait, if I didn't get in, I mean, like I was like,
Because you didn't think about applying to others, or
well, the
Right.
application fee was expensive.
Ah, okay.
So like,
Right.
$50 a pop or whatever it was. I'm like, this is not cheap. And so
Yeah.
I was like, I'm gonna do this, and hopefully I'll get in. And I was fortunate I did.
Was college always on your radar? Or is there a point? Listen, I got to go work and help the family, or somehow is that part of the little
So that's
professor thing?
no,
like-
so that's a great question because at some point I was working at a fast food restaurant,
Yeah.
right? And I was doing well there, and I was still in high school, and I became like an assistant manager or something, while in high school.
Yeah, yeah.
And then my manager at the time, who was an awesome woman and a mentor of mine, she was like, this could be a career.
Yeah, interesting. Right.
And
right.
she was talking about like your first year out, you could make like $30,000 a year, something like that, which to me seemed like a ton of money back
Yeah.
then, right? And I thought about it for a minute, and I was like, nah, I can't do that. But I mean, I easily could have, right?
But why did you say? Because you felt there was something better, or what did you know
I
at that
think there was
point?
something that was more.
Okay.
I was like, I had sort of, it's interesting. I had like when you're a kid, you always have dreams of what you think you want to be when you grow up. Like when I was a little kid, I
Right.
wanted to play left field for the Red Sox,
Ah,
right?
did you? Got it.
Um, And
You're a diehard Red Sox
I'm a
fan.
diehard Red Sox
I still
fan.
like you.
Yeah, thank you.
That is a
Yeah.
That is a
But
negative.
but as an aside, so here's the funny again, the sort of the vagaries of life. Like I wanted to play left field for the Red Sox. My mom, who did the best she could, bought me my first Little League glove.
Yeah.
I was left-handed.
Yeah.
And she thought that meant the glove should go on my left hand. So I played the first 3 years of Little League throwing with the wrong hand.
Really?
Yeah. And I also meant that I learned to hit right-handed. So I took one of the few advantages away of batting left-handed.
Hitter, yeah.
But anyways, so that didn't play out the way I thought. But then I was like, I liked other things. I liked nature. I liked to write. And so I just thought about these.
Okay.
But the other thing too is like when you're young, in general, and if you're young specifically and you're not exposed to a lot of people who went to college, you don't even know what your options are. You know what I mean? And so I was, this sounds so intuitive, but the other day, or a couple weeks ago, I was reading a book about memory and the brain, right? And in it, they're talking about that part of your brain that processes and stores memory is actually the same part of your brain that generates your imagination. And it seems sort of intuitive, but what also made me realize is that like when we say that like the idea came out of nowhere, like that's a physical impossibility.
Okay.
You know what I mean? Like literally our imagination is only recombining things
from
memories. And so like if you're thinking about what am I going to be when I grow up, and you don't have any experiences or memories about what your options are, your imagination is so limited.
Interesting. Okay.
And so
Can I just ask one thing because it's so fascinating. Does that you're at McDonald's, the manager's like, hey, you're thinking this is great, like a career, I got it, money. Something clicks in and says no, but there's more. I don't even know what that means.
Yeah, there's more.
But it means you're tying that to something in your childhood that had a memory, even though you're not articulating imagination, your mind's able to go there.
Yeah. Like I've always had a romance for writers and writing and stuff like that.
That's something innate, something to your personality.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And just for clarity, it was Rack's restaurants, not McDonald's.
Oh, sorry.
And they're now, but they're.
Did I add McDonald's?
You added McDonald's. Yeah. They're bankrupt now, but it was an awesome place to work, and I
you
really
McDonald's.
like.
That's my own memory.
No, it's okay. Yeah.
Got it.
So. So getting back to your question, it was probably late 20s where I was like, man, what is, because I think also like, and you see this a lot, like when you move up the ladder, there is a psychological toll. In fact, there's research that shows that like you could have moved up the ladder and you still have worse physical health than someone who's at that same rung that you're on now.
Okay.
Essentially because the stress and the strain of the journey, and so it was, my situation probably wasn't uncommon where I was like I felt like an imposter, like I didn't belong in places, like why am I here and they're not there? And so I really wanted to understand sort of, both, how to move up, but also the psychology behind it. And the other thing that was happening at the time is I had left my, pretty lucrative career in marketing and started my own company that was only going to work with causes. And so that was my first sort of like, how do I address this crisis of meaning?
That's still what you're doing, part of what you do now,
Still
right?
do, work with
nonprofits.
Yeah. So for example, like years later, like as a kid who benefited from the food stamp program to then help the state of California redesign the food stamp program to lower the stigma, like that was like a full circle moment,
That's cool, yeah.
And so, but what I was seeing in that work was the same sort of debate I was having internally, which was this school or this education system is having problems and we should really figure out how to fix it. But you could always point to a couple of kids who made it out. And so some people would say, well, why don't more kids just work hard like these kids that made it out?
Right.
And so it was a barrier to fixing problems.
Right.
And so my personal journey was sort of colliding with professionally what I was seeing. And I was like, there's just got to be a better way to have conversations about, how people make it and why.
So are you saying, because we have a foundation attached to, the Laughing Man Coffee, and we work with farmers, we do housing, education, and we try to find other programs. But as I was saying to you earlier, I like victory stories.
Yeah.
Not to mean you can't tackle the issues, but how do you do it in a positive way?
Yeah.
So it sort of sounds like what you're saying is there's a better way to get people to act than guilt them. There's almost an inspiring way. Is that what you're addressing?
There is, but there's also sort of the danger of like, part of what I was also looking to do is the way in which we told success stories
Right.
was often too limited.
Okay.
So you can inspire someone and say, look, they made it.
Yeah.
But then the way in which that story may get told or interpreted could be completely different. So years ago, we ultimately weren't able to publish this because we couldn't get the rights. But I wondered what it would look like to recut a trailer for Rocky.
Okay.
And so most people, when they think about Rocky, they
Yeah.
think about the training scenes, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're like, man, no one worked harder than this guy, you know? And I was like, but if you watch that movie more closely, you're going to see a lot. He doesn't get that first fight unless someone breaks their hand,
Right. Right.
or they wanted someone who was Italian, you know, and he had the name Rocky, and so
Yeah,
that's why he was plucked. And then there's also a moment where he gets called in and he thinks he's going to be a sparring partner,
Exactly. Yeah.
and he
yeah.
turns it down. He turns down the chance at the fight, and the promoter has to persuade him.
Right.
And then as it moves on,
He's also got to convince Mickey, right? Because Mickey
yeah, so
says you can't see, right?
Mickey's got to
Yeah,
train him,
yeah.
and then he's also like he was a loan shark, and that guy gives him some spending money
Yeah.
to basically allow him to sort of like train for free.
Right.
He goes into Paulie's, butchery where he works
Yeah.
and gets free steaks every morning. So
Right.
the protein,
Yeah,
you know,
that's a
and
good point.
on and on and on. There are all these things that are like, yeah, of course he worked super hard, right?
Right.
But if you take some of these things away, is he still where he is?
Yeah. Interesting.
And so, but we don't dissect those stories maybe as well as we could. And so the takeaway, and there's a real thing called fundamental attribution error,
Yeah.
where we generally are more attuned to seeing individual agency than other environmental contributions.
Is that Monopoly
yeah.
test,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
They
yeah,
give
yeah,
the guy,
yeah.
which is insane.
So insane. Yeah,
They give the
Paul,
guy double money, and he's like, "Why'd you win?" He's like, "Because I know how to play the game."
yeah. It's because I bought Park Place. Yeah,
I mean, that's
yeah.
nuts.
Yeah. Paul Pitt's research. It was really fascinating.
Right.
But when I first came upon that research and met Paul, what was interesting to me was it also helped flip the table a little bit, because one of the things I was also struggling with was there's a lot of stories where someone sort of makes it, right, and they do really well, and yet they're not then supportive to other people coming up behind them.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I realized that the psychology was really complicated as to why that is, and understandable. So instead
What
of
did
just
he
saying,
what did he give some
Well,
insight to?
well, so his is one. It was just the general psychology of it. Like, so with the Monopoly study that you
Yeah.
mentioned, where two people come in to play a game of Monopoly, one person wins the coin flip, and they start the game with twice as much money. They get to roll two die. They get more money around go. All this. These two people, in starting the game, had no animosity towards each other.
Right. Okay.
They were just two people. And yet, over the course of the game, you see one person treating the other person
Yeah.
poorly.
I forgot about that aspect of it.
And it's like, man, the psychology is pretty deep on this. And then there's been other research that shows, like, say someone who has, and this is from Rachel Rutan, who's at the University of Toronto, someone who has quit smoking successfully is often less compassionate to someone trying to quit smoking. And you're like, how can that possibly be true? Like, they should know how hard it is.
Right.
But if you think about the person who has quit smoking, they probably have heard, like, man, what willpower you had. You know, they're not asking, like, you know, hey, who was the person who invented Nicorette gum?
Okay.
Or like, wow, it must have been easier when you couldn't smoke at a bar anymore. It was you know what I mean? Like, there are other things that made that journey different. And so this idea that some people who've gone through a struggle are less compassionate than people going through the struggle is real. And you see that playing out in issues today, like with immigration and things along those lines. And when I spoke to Rachel about this, one of the things that she had said, which was interesting, because she didn't know why, and particularly as it relates to sort of climbing the ladder, there is this idea of, if you've climbed the ladder and you've thought you've done something, think about how important it is for you to think that you did it largely on your own, because it means that it's in your control. Versus if you thought it was something that was, you know, from other factors or a lot of luck, all of a sudden your grip on that rung is looser and more tenuous, which is like, as easy as I made it up, I could fall down.
Right.
And
okay.
that is something that maybe people are like, they don't want to think about or confront.
They don't want to. So just say that a little more. They don't want to think about the fact that they say you quit smoking, and maybe it was a time when you couldn't smoke in bar, or maybe you could, so it was harder because it was around you all the time.
Yeah.
And so somebody else is trying to quit. what they don't tell me again, what they don't want to factor into is the same thing you're talking about, the factors that help them
Yeah.
or made it easier.
Yeah, or I mean, I don't think it's a conscious choice. They're just thinking
Right.
like, man, people give me a lot of credit for smoking. Isn't that great? I quit smoking on my own,
Right.
and now this person isn't able smoking, quit on their own,
Yeah.
and it's probably because they're not just trying as hard.
Got it. Yeah.
Versus like, you could have had other assistance on that maybe they didn't or
Right.
whatever.
Right. I find a similar thing sometimes with parents who have had kids and now they have a friend who just had kids and now they're going through the
Yeah.
struggles, right?
Yeah.
And there's almost like a and it's not, they're not mean, but there's almost like you'll get through it.
Yeah.
Like don't like it's almost like there's a harder
Yeah.
like
Yeah,
I don't know how
it's
to describe it.
yeah,
but-
no, I mean it is one of these things where we well, even like that, I mean, like, I'm not equating this to probably be politically insensitive, but it's like when some people go through childbirth and they're like, they don't remember all of the struggle and the
Yes,
pain. They
yeah.
remember how beautiful it was, right?
Right. Interesting.
And also this idea of how we tell our stories. Daniel Kahneman, who is one of the fathers of behavioral economics, once said, like, there is the remembering self and the lived self, and the lived self is but a stranger to me. Which is like there's how I actually experience
Yeah,
life,
yeah.
but
I
that doesn't
remember.
matter in terms of like compared to how I remember and how I tell that story.
Well, we talk about, when you think about having a second kid, like there's no way if you really remembered every pain.
Yeah.
I mean, you probably still do it, but
Yeah.
you don't remember that. It's great.
No.
It was joy. Yeah, it was a little tough. I was tired,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
things are awesome and I love my kid.
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
Like-
Well, if you actually think about it, like when most people meet someone for the first time,
yeah.
they're probably, and they're introducing themselves, right? You're probably pulling from a very familiar set of stories. Like even some of the things
Right.
I've talked today, I've told these things like 1,000 times, right?
Right.
And you think about like what percentage of your life do you actually remember? And it's got to be sort of so small.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. And so that just sort of makes it more important that the way we tell our stories
Yeah.
is more nuanced and more complete.
Interesting.
Because that's what people know of us.
Yeah. So on that point, talking about some of the books you've done,
Yeah.
rewriting the little engine, that could,
Yeah.
which is almost like what you said about Rocky, sort of reframing.
Yeah.
It. Tell us a little bit about what went into that and why.
Yeah, so the first point needs to go back to, the point of origin, which was I was telling that story about headwinds and tailwinds earlier, right?
Yeah.
And that was research that was done by Shai Davide.
Okay.
And his research happened to be written up in an article by Maria Konnikova in the New Yorker called America's Surprising Views on Inequality.
Okay.
And I happen to know Shai because we were both at the New School. And so he sent me this article. And it just so happened that the last paragraph of that article, Konnikova asked him, what in his own life does he do to reflect his research? And he said, I can tell you what I don't do. I don't read the little engine that could to my kids because some engines can't and it's not fair.
Okay.
And I was like,
Okay.
huh. And I was like, I understand where he's coming from. It seems a little harsh because the
Right.
message of that book is, I think I can, I think I can, I think I can, which again is an important
Great
message.
yeah. Yeah.
But in the same token, if you go back and you read that book, you'll see that like there's a lot of people who are very uncaring, in terms of
Yeah.
not helping, a struggling engine. And so I was like, geez, I wonder what a different, more nuanced story of that. Like literally, the metaphor of tracks. Like, some people are on the right side, the wrong side. We're on different tracks. Things like get in our way, et cetera. And so I just basically thought about, what if you told a story where different engines are on different journeys, and it still had the original character, and she still, struggled a little bit, but believed in herself and got over.
Right.
And then what if you just ask that engine, like, when she doesn't see her other friends coming across the tracks, like, what happened? What would her reaction be? And to the conversation we were just having, she's like, aren't they trying hard? And instead of like castigating her or criticizing her, the wise old engine there just asks her about her journey and
Right.
how theirs might be different. Like, how much wind was at your back? Did you have anything fall on your tracks?
Yeah.
And so she slowly comes to the realization, without feeling guilty or feeling bad, that maybe something's happened to them. And so the message of that book is not just, I think I can, but she's asked the question, do you think there's anything we could do to help them? And it's like, I think we can,
Oh,
and goes
interesting,
back
right.
up and helps them down.
Right.
And And so it was just sort of like, again, going back to the memory stuff, this was in my mind because I read this article, which was from luck because I knew this guy.
Yeah.
And then even after that, like, yeah, of course it was my effort to write the story. But then you need to get it published. And I shared it with some people who made me feel like the story was good, including my kids. Like, yeah, there's
Oh, you
something
ran
here,
it
right?
by them?
I did. Yeah. They were my first
Did
readers.
they like it?
They did.
Okay.
And it's a classic thing. Like, if they would have said it sucked or someone else said no good, maybe it just
Right,
stops there,
right.
right? So again, that encouragement. And then someone said there may be IP issues because you're using old
I was going to
characters.
ask you. I wonder how that worked. Yeah.
And so they're like, you may want to check. And so
Okay.
I looked at the copy of the original I had in my home,
Yeah.
and I saw that it was published by a division of Penguin. Penguin, coincidentally, was in the building I used to work in,
Oh,
not
that's
too far from here.
Yeah.
And so I just cold called them. And I said, look, I've got an idea for a children's book based on your character. And they're like, send me what you're thinking. And I was a description, didn't hear from them.
Mm-hmm.
So I followed up, and they were like, send us the whole manuscript. So again, I could have given up. So this is effort, right?
Yeah.
And then finally, with some persistence, someone said, hey, do you want to have a call with one of our editors? And I thought what they were going to do is say, you can't do these certain things if you want to do something.
Got it.
And instead, coincidentally, it was the 90th anniversary of the original was coming up, and they've been looking for new ways to tell the story.
Wow.
And they were like, would you be interested in this?
That's nice.
And so just complete, luck and serendipity of the
yeah.
timing. And so there's so even if you break, and this is what I do sometimes in the class, I'll say, like, take an achievement of yours, right? And sort of like, just break it down. Like, think through all the things that sort of made it possible. And again, when I do that and I tell the story, it makes it larger and more cool and more wonderful than if it was like, yeah, I had this idea for a children's book and it became a bestseller. Isn't that awesome?
Right. But I think there's something so uncanny about your trajectory that the stories you come across seem to fit the narrative you're trying to tell. Which is awesome.
Yeah. Well, there's definitely a little bit of confirmation bias in the way we see the world. But yeah, but I'm also I'm just attuned to it.
Well, that's what I'm saying. I think there's something to that. And
Yeah.
it goes back to what we were saying. That's the non-actionable reflection part. It does express itself later in life, but there is that reflection aspect where now you're in a place where you can just see things a little differently. Doors open, you see connections differently.
Yeah, and it's both for ourselves and for others. So like we have an exercise in class that we do sometimes where we talk about like, what do you do when you pass a homeless person on the street? Right. Some people may do nothing and just walk past. Some people may say something. Some people may just sort of, give some money and not say anything. And I'm like, have you ever stopped to just consider how that person got on that bench?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, just wondered, like, this was someone's child.
Yeah.
They went to a school at some point. They lived somewhere, and they're here right now. And are you giving them? Are you seeing them?
Yeah.
Are you like, saying what their name is? Hi, I'm Bob, or how are you doing? Or like, and that's hard, for a lot of different reasons. But I think we walk so often through life invisible to not only our own journeys, but certainly the journeys of others.
Yeah.
And I think that's a bad way to walk through life.
Well, it is a bad way, and I think it starts with what you just said about us being invisible to our own.
Yeah. Yep.
I think it starts here, and then your perception changes.
Yeah.
Something's got to connect here.
Yeah.
And I think, again, the trajectory you're talking about allows people to just consider their lives a little more.
Yeah, for sure.
Which is amazing. The other story, I heard you talk about this, and it leads into the second book, which is America Dreaming. I think that's the name of it, right?
America's Dreaming, yep.
America's Dreaming, and a teacher you once had, Mr. Droll or Mr. Droll?
Mr. Downs.
Mr. Downs.
Yeah.
You went to look him up, I think, to thank him because you were doing this Grateful Everyday project, and then you heard he passed away.
I did.
So tell us a little bit about that, and then that book. Yeah.
Yeah, so a couple of years ago, I was just thinking about something to do. It was the month of November. It's a time where we think about gratitude. And I was like, I'm just going to thank someone every day on Facebook, right? Which I don't spend a lot of time on social media, but I'm like, that seems like a good use of it.
Yeah.
And so I, first thing was about my mom and then my brother and sister. And so like, I just like going through the month, and I was like, and I started thinking about like this teacher. And I mentioned earlier, I moved from Boston to Pennsylvania. I had a thick Boston accent. I wore different clothes.
Right.
So I literally like looked like I was, from a different planet, when I walked into class in Pennsylvania. And it was not an easy transition, right? but I had a teacher. He was super cool. He's actually the teacher, going back to the story I told earlier, who
Yeah.
gave my autobiography assignment.
Oh, really?
You know, which
Wow.
I didn't even realize until
Wow.
last year.
Wow.
And so I was like, man, I should reach out and thank Mr. Downs because he was just a really cool guy.
Yeah.
You know, he also really nurtured a love of learning, which was really great. So he was just awesome in so many different ways.
It's amazing, just on a side note, how, because I can think of 2 or 3 teachers in my
Yeah.
life. It's amazing how that particular role, if done right, stays with you
Yep.
forever.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
fascinating.
Yep.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so I was like, I'm gonna just and I'd thought about him previously, but now I'm
Yeah.
like, oh, I'll just Google him and see where he is.
Yeah.
And yeah, the thing that popped up was his obituary, and
Oh.
he died 2 weeks earlier.
Wow.
And I was like, this sucks. And so when I was writing this book, which was based off of, a new kid's first day of school, the character's named America because it's a universal experience that we have. It's amazing. I think it's like 70% of all children will change school districts at least once in their life.
Okay.
I think it's
experience that sense of.
Yep,
Yeah.
experience like the first line of the book is like if you've ever felt all alone in a crowd,
Mm.
and so yeah, it was this sort of like this sort of thing I had experienced that I thought was universal,
Yeah.
and so it felt very natural for me to name the character Mr. Downs, and so I did that. I made I sort of when the illustrator drew him, I was like, can you make him sort of look more like
Yeah.
this? And then what was super cool was that before the book came out, I was able to track down his family through connections at the school.
Wow.
And the first public reading I had was at Books a Million in York, Pennsylvania, and they came.
Oh, nice.
And so, like, I think his grandchildren were there. So it was the first kids who heard this book read aloud.
Oh, that's beautiful.
That.
Wow.
And then I had an event at the school
Yeah.
the next day, and they were there, and we went back into the classroom. It was just a really
That's
wonderful.
nice, yeah.
And I'm still in touch. And the America Gives Thanks also features Mr. Downs, and so like they're like really excited. Like, when's the book coming out? So it's really
That's
wonderful.
the one that just came out.
Just came out, yeah.
So staying with this one, this is about how we can welcome people more into.
So each one of all the books. So the beautiful thing about children's books, and I was actually just having a conversation with yesterday, which I didn't think about. I didn't know actually, and it was on a book. It was on a podcast that was all about children's books,
Okay.
and they said that they were just talking to some South American writers, and like in South America, apparently children's books are more message oriented.
Okay.
Versus we can have just something fun about a
Silly,
rectangle or
got
silly
it,
and stuff like
okay.
that, right? And he was wondering why. And so I see children's books as an opportunity sort of to tell, yes, a fun and engaging and interesting story,
Yeah.
but also as a way to get kids to think about something.
Sure.
And the adults who read them to. So, like...
What's the history of the fable and
Exactly.
everything, the
And
parable? Yeah.
Yep. And so Three Little Engines was just thinking about like, how we make, how we achieve anything and why other people won't. And America's Dreaming was like, what do we do to make kids feel welcome? And the America Gives Thanks is more about, this idea of gratitude, but specifically being grateful who have stood up and sort of complained or raised their voice in a desire to make the world better.
Interesting. Yeah.
And so, and that book, to talk about sort of crazy inspirations, that book was inspired by January 6th. And, my oldest daughter had written an essay for her 7th grade English class. And the opening paragraph was describing the moment when she was sitting in our local pizza shop watching people storm the Capitol.
Yeah.
And that combined with her not understanding why people wouldn't like wear a mask to help someone during COVID. She's like, I realized, because the essay's theme was, what have I learned, over the last 6 months? She's like, what I learned was that the days of rainbows and unicorns was over. And to
That's
see,
harsh.
to see your kid's innocence just splayed on a
Yeah,
page
yeah.
was awful. And I could identify with it as well, because as someone who has benefited by food stamps and student loans and Pell Grants and a whole host of things that have come out of Washington, D.C., have come out of people who are trying to make the world better and using policy to do so. like my relationship to Washington D.C. was different,
Right.
which is where this book is set. And I was just like, I went down there to try to think about ideas for this, and I was sitting on the Capitol steps feeling like disillusioned like my daughter was. And I just saw these kids on field trips and the wonder that they had about and I was like, man. And so I just recreated this field trip around DC, and everywhere you went, you'd be like, there's a person who made the world better because they stood up for something. There's something. And it was, and so, so the messages are all different, but they all have this, again, the theme of like, how do we, share messages that can help us or others move up.
And what I love about it is I think the having the aim be a question, meaning like just sit with this question.
Yeah.
Is positive. It's universal. I took a trip to Philly with my kids' class, right? And I love American history. And listen, you could talk to anybody, and it could be the worst thing in the world. But if you're able to step back and just take sort of a bigger picture view of what happened, there's no way you cannot be inspired by it. And it was an incredible trip. And so I love the idea that there's actually almost a third place perspective that is not political, is not agenda driven. It's just, here's the question. Just sit with it. Whatever you do with it, fine, but just sit with the question.
And it's funny, like if I read a study once about sort of the power of questions. And like if I asked you, what did you have for breakfast this morning? Like you could not help but think about what you had for breakfast, right?
Right.
So a question it's an honest and direct way to open the mind. Versus if I told you that oatmeal is awful, I don't know what you had for breakfast, but if I just said that, all of a sudden you're now going to defending what your opinion on, you know what I mean?
Exactly.
You're landing on a judgment on oatmeal. So, but I mean, like, I think sometimes we have a tendency to be a society that values answers more than questions, when questions probably would be more helpful.
There's part of this philosophy school I've been going to for a while. One of the things we look at is dialectic. Which way back meant the art of speaking the truth. And there's 4 principles. The first one is let truth be the aim, right? So it's not my opinion, your opinion. Like we're going to discover something, and there's a whole conversation on what true is. The second one is listen, right? The third one is ask questions. And the fourth is willing to be refuted. But that asking questions is just, keeps it open. It's a huge tool. Which we don't use enough.
Well, it's also the idea too, like this idea of being open to things. Like to be refuted. We like to think that we have the answers, and we go into conversations not sort of being open to someone's perspective, and things shut down too quickly. Versus like oh, all right, maybe I can see your point of view, and I may not agree with it, but I can respect that you have a different point of view than I have, and now I can see the world in a different way,
But I think starting even with the first principle, what is the aim? And maybe the aim is just to stay open, right? But if the aim is again to play gotcha or play an agenda, then we're not really having a conversation.
Or to convince someone, right?
Yes, exactly.
Like I'm not here to convince someone that their journey has been easier or harder than someone else's, right? Your journey is your journey, and I think all we need to do is just be a little bit more open to like that someone may be different than yours and had different challenges. And, I think that we got in a whole lot of trouble over the last several years trying to, place some people's problems above others, or to diminish challenges that some people have. And, whole swaths of society felt like they got left behind.
Right. A couple of questions on when you were writing America's Dreaming.
America's Dreaming,
America's Dreaming, apologize. I heard one interview where you said the main character is not in the book. America is like a vibe or something. For lack of a better word, which is so interesting because I'm working on something through Laughing Man where there's a character there, but we didn't want to personalize it for the same reason you had said, which was it's not about a particular person's point of view, right? In a sense, it's not a particular person of a color or race or whatever telling a story, whatever that may be. So you said, let's not show it. Let's make it a consciousness or something. So talking about that decision a little bit, and this gets back to this is just sort of thinking in broader terms. Being in a place where we have to overthink that,
Yeah.
and I think it works in your story.
Yeah.
But were you challenged at all with like, it's too much. It's too much overthinking. I should be able to tell this story and not have people get fixated on
Yeah.
the person telling it.
Well, it's in fact, I mean, it goes a little further back than
Yeah.
so. When I originally, so again, as the author's note says, this is based off of my experience, right?
Right.
But I was like, let me try to make this a little bit more universal,
Right.
right? And so originally, the logic was I want to make it universal, so I'm going to name the character America.
Okay.
And I was like, all right. And then I made a judgment as to what do I think the gender of someone named America would be.
Right.
So that was in my mind. And then I'm like, well, instead of having them move from Boston to Pennsylvania, I'm going to have them move from further away, right? So maybe they'll be coming from another country,
Yeah,
right?
okay.
And that's how I was originally thinking about this. And we were at a time in the publishing business, and this wasn't the feedback from my publisher, but from others I was getting, was that I could not tell that story.
Right.
I couldn't tell a story where the main character was a different gender than me or wasn't based on my country of origin.
Yeah.
And I thought, my first impression was that seems, I could understand it because you don't want to take away from limited shelf space of a story that someone could tell.
Right.
On the other hand, I was like, this has been the work of writers and actors throughout history where people are basically taking perspectives of others and sharing it. So it was sort of like I was sort of stuck. Like, what am I going to do? And so I was like, all right, well, I have a solution. We'll just never show.
Right,
Well,
right.
You'll never know. And the cool thing about it is I don't know. And so there's at the end of that first book, there's a class photo, right?
Okay.
And so presumably in that photo, one of those students is America. I don't know which one it is.
Right. Right.
And so, and I think what it did unintentionally is not only did it create a character who can be anyone, so you're sort of like more empathizing with the experience than the identity.
Yeah. Yeah.
But what you're also doing is you are opening up a way to show that story that it was different. And my illustrator, Tai Mai Fuang, she did a fantastic job about how do you, like there's one scene in the first book about communicating sadness, but you can't show the sadness of the person's face because you don't see them, right? And instead you just see a single teardrop falling to the ground and then the image of their shoe. Or that you're playing with proportions. Like have you ever felt all alone in a crowd and you're just seeing sort of like the bigness of the scene of the school and people taller than you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Or like you're standing in front of the class and you see the shadow of America. So
Yeah, yeah.
it lended itself
It
to
works
some
really
really
well, yeah.
worked really,
Yeah,
really well.
yeah.
But again, it does sort of take away the limitations that some people might say, like, I can't identify with this because they don't look like me.
Yeah.
Instead, I can identify with this person because this is the experience that I can relate to.
Yeah. No, I totally get it. I guess what bummed me out when I heard you say that,
Yeah.
bummed me out for you was, here's a guy who has been through some stuff.
Yeah.
Like he's talking something true,
Yeah.
which could be anybody.
Yeah.
The struggle is real
Yeah.
for whoever
Yeah.
who's been through
Yeah.
that.
Yeah.
And somehow he's made, in my mind, when I heard that, I was like, he's made to second guess that.
You're right.
And I would think that there's a universality to other people who have been in that, regardless
Yeah.
of where they came from, that in a way somebody should be able to talk about and not worry about
Yeah.
it. So I think it ended up working out.
Yeah.
And it's like we got to have to necessarily
Yeah.
get into it, but just the idea, I was like, I didn't think that was healthy.
Yeah.
You
Well,
know?
I definitely hear where you're coming from. But in the spirit of dialectical, I was like, someone was refuting my position in how I was telling the story.
Yeah.
And I was like, I may not agree with it, but I understood it. And I think that sometimes with a lot of things we do, we course correct too far,
Yeah.
and then we need to figure out how we can come back and sort of allow for some of that stuff. And so, it ended up, I think, working out, which is great. And it forced a little bit more creativity, which is cool. But
And I think you sacrificed for the bigger message, meaning
Yeah.
like you could have done that and maybe you would have alienated half your readership.
Yeah.
So there was what I appreciate and respect about it, there was a bigger goal.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, with all the stuff, I mean, like I mean, I try to be careful about how I talk about things, right? Even when you say, like, the question about privilege, I'm like, oh man, it's gonna get me in trouble for saying like whatever. But I mean, like, I think at some point you have to just be like, hopefully we give each other more of the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah,
Like,
I
are you
think that's
coming
what
from
we
a good
need.
place? I mean, can we not take a soundbite? Can we sort of appreciate sort of the spirit of where this is coming from?
Yeah.
And just be a little bit more kind to each other,
By the
so,
way,
yeah.
the headline of this podcast will be "Privilege does not exist."
Yeah.
Chris is going to be like, "This is the one that total clickbait."
There's your soundbite.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. So in respect for your time, a couple of things I want to
Yeah.
end with. 2 questions, and then I'm going to steal something from your podcast, but I'm
Yeah.
going to start with something I
Yep.
like to ask, which is there something that you do before a project or whatever that grounds yourself? I mean, you do a lot.
Yeah.
From the coaching of your kid, you get into, you've got a lot of stuff going on. Something you do that either brings you back to that gratitude place or brings you back to yourself or grounds yourself that allows you to keep going.
Yeah. I gotta be honest with you, it's probably a bit of a struggle. I mean, like, there's a lot of different hats that I wear. And so you're doing a lot of context switching. And so how do you go about life in a way where you're not always like judging yourself based off, is this thing successful?
Right.
Is this getting the response I wanted to? And so like, I try to build in things into daily routines that I think can be helpful to me. And so like years ago, I used to get the paper every day, and that's how I love I still love to read, right? And so I would start every day reading. And I was like, but I was like, this is not how I want to start my days, reading the paper and seeing sort of doom and gloom, right? And so now I get a cup of coffee, I walk my dog, I grab a cup of coffee, and I sit and I just read like 30 pages from a book every day. And I think that sort of grounds me to being open to perspectives or knowledge that I think is helpful.
Yeah.
In taking on a project, I try to create sort of different routines that are helpful.
Yeah.
So the Substack newsletter, like every Friday, I'm writing that, and that's like sacrosanct time.
Yeah.
And I'm spending the week, like often walking my dog, thinking about what am I writing about this week?
Right.
And so that by the time I sit down to write, I've already written it, in my head. With new projects, I try to create sort of routines. So last summer, I wrote a screenplay because I always wanted to write one.
Yeah.
And it was the idea of writing it that was really important.
You love
to me.
writing.
I love writing.
Yeah.
I like
and
writing.
your newsletter is awesome, by the way.
Thank
We
you.
didn't get into it, but it's awesome.
Yeah, and I love writing different things. Like, so like, whether it's a children's book or Substack newsletter or, a screenplay, this is really neat.
Yeah.
And so, but with that, like, I would just go on a really, I wrote it like, I think every Tuesday or Thursday afternoon. And I had already sort of mapped out the scenes on index cards. I stole this sort of trick from Matt Damon and Ben Affleck, where like an average movie has X amount of scenes. And if you just write the scene on this, And so I would basically think about what scene I wanted to write. And I would drive 20 minutes away. So again, I'd be thinking about it. And I would park by the water.
Yeah.
And I would sit and I would just write by the water.
That's cool.
And so it was like, it was creating the space before sitting down to something. So I think that with creative projects especially, like if you sit down and try to be creative, it's really hard.
Yeah.
And so it's like, how do I sort of create something where when I'm finally ready, like, I've blocked out the time to do it, but I've created a little bit of a runway to think about it. And so when I finally sit, I'm good.
That's awesome. A big question, but you obviously are trying to create impact with your work.
Yeah.
You've been on this long journey. It's certainly not over, more to do. How has your, I would say, definition of success changed, evolved? How do you, X amount of years from now, right? Aside from, I hope 1 million people read this, right?
Yeah.
How do you view success? How do you view satisfaction in this work? Or how has that definition changed for you at this point?
I think it has increasingly become very singular.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, I once interviewed Sal Khan for something, and we asked him the same question.
Oh, okay.
And he told the story about sort of the creation of Khan Academy it started from just his relationship with his cousin trying to help her with his homework. And it's like, it always starts with one, you know? And so to me, like, it's the idea of imagining one child reading a book, or going into a school and seeing one classroom. Or when I'm writing the Substack, it's like the one person who's like, this really helped me through a tough week. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I think sometimes it gets really, there's a tendency to go to scale,
Right.
which like has this resulted in helping 1 million people or whatever, right? And you end up chasing numbers. In fact, I had the experience once where, with that quiz I mentioned before, your American Dream score, the day that article came out on, you know, I mentioned before, I could sit and I was watching Google Analytics. I'm like, there are 3,000 people right this minute taking this quiz. And it blew, and it was like an ego thing, right? This is so cool. And then later that day, I saw someone had written a comment. You know, I took that score and my score was X, which meant that she had a lot of, you know, really struggles in her life, almost everything going against her. And she goes, I feel awful. And it was like, man, this is not about the 3,000, it's about the one.
Yeah.
And I got to, and that's sort of remembering. And then the other thing too is like, in terms of just success, I mean, like, you know, I mentioned with like my children's book, my audience is my kids. My audience for everything is my kids. Like, I'm like, there's this sort of this sad thing, like, you know, not that they're like, you know, going to read my Substacks every week this week, you know, or this, you know, while they're young, or listen to my podcast. But I'm like, man, when I'm gone, they're going to have a treasure trove of stuff I've left behind to understand who I am and how I think. And I hope that is helpful to them and the people that they, you know, try to make a difference in their lives and things like that.
Yeah. There's a Zen story where basically, you know, the kid breaks his leg and the family's like, oh my God, he broke his leg. And then somebody comes to recruit people for the army and the kid can't go because he broke his leg. And it's just patterns like that. And the whole point is it good or is it bad, right?
Yeah.
And there is this sense with what you said that and I meet certain people like this, and I would think you'd fall into this, where you're true to this thing you want to put out.
Yeah.
Who knows where it lands?
Exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
But I have a feeling there's such a satisfaction in doing it. I feel that way about my job.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's a pretty special place to be.
No doubt. I mean, it's got to, on one hand, it has to be about the process and the enjoying it. On the other hand, it's very natural to sort of like want to have this breakthrough moment, right? Like, you know, one of my favorite movies is It's a Wonderful Life, right? And the story of that is incredible. You know, like, it started off as a short story and like as part of a Christmas card, you know, and then became a movie and then had this long sort of story. And so you don't know what's going to happen with it, right? There's some things you do where you have a better sense. Like, one of the reasons why I love teaching is to be in front of, like, you know, 16, 20 students who have this, who I can be like, I was where you were, right? And I can be vulnerable in sharing my story, and I can see the impact it has when they leave that class. I mean, that grounds you, right? You're really proximate to the work you're trying to do. And you're right, a lot of the other things, you know, I don't know how someone responds to something I write or put it, but it's like, you just, you know, put something out there with good intentions and hope for the best.
Awesome. I'm going to steal something from your show, then we'll end. Your podcast is Attribution. At the end, you ask the guest to thank somebody. Anybody you'd like to...
Yes. So there's a lot of people I would thank, and sometimes you go through this process and sort of like you assume you try to find a very obscure sort of thing, and you leave off the person who you should start with. And so one, I want to start with my wife, Julie. She's so supportive. Like, as you can imagine, with all of the different things that I do, you know, it's pretty crazy, and she's been with me every step of the journey. So I'm really grateful for her. I'm grateful for my mother and my brother and my sister and the sacrifices they've made for me to be where I am. I'm very grateful for my kids who inspire me to do this work. My teachers who have been really great, like Mr. Downs. You know, I could go on. And also, like, the unsung people. Like, one of the characters in America Gives Thanks is Claiborne Pell. Like, we look at something like Pell Grants and we just take it for granted. No, there was a dude there who, like, had to say, like, let's write some legislation to make college more affordable, right? And so, you know, and even with the defunding of PBS that just happened, which is, you know, criminal, you know, my preschool was Sesame Street. and I happen to be like, the first cohort of kids, who
that.
grew up on that,
Interesting.
right?
Yeah, yeah.
And so, like, who knows if I would love reading and if I'd be where I am if I didn't have that head start. So there's, so many people that I'm so grateful for, that have helped me to get to where I am.
Awesome. I was so looking forward to talking to you
Yeah.
today and reconnecting.
Yeah,
This
yeah.
did not disappoint.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
It was
Congratulations
awesome.
on all this. This is
Thank
really
you.
wonderful.
I appreciate it.
Yeah.
Thanks, man.